No changes at the top for us. Ohio State was number one last week. They remain number one. They continue to have the number one strength of record. Their win against Texas, I think, is the best win in college football. Going on and absolutely demolishing their week 2 opponent only reinforces their number one status. So Ohio this week, they sit there in firm control at the top of the college football world as our number one team. At number 2, big change this week, the Oregon Ducks. They had the most impressive win of week 2, just a complete record-setting blowout against a team that's in the Power 4. And people will sit there and say, well, Oklahoma State's not very good. Just watch the level of execution. Watch the athleticism. The quarterback was a question mark coming into the season. I think he's a legitimate strength. Look at the weaponry that's starting to emerge. Look at how they tee off defensively. Look how uncomfortable Oklahoma State was from start to finish in that game. So we had Oregon number 5 last week. That I thought was a pretty good place for them to be. I now move them all the way up to number 2 with a resounding and dominant week 2 performance. At number 3, the LSU Tigers. I had them at number 2 last week. I've now dropped them down one spot. Uninspired offensive performance a little bit against a lesser opponent in Louisiana Tech slides them down one spot. The other thing that affects LSU's evaluation is that Clemson didn't look very good in their week 2 game against the Troy Trojans. So LSU, they slide down just one spot, still pretty good spot to be, but they have Florida this week at home to further solidify what's been a really nice start for the national championship hopeful LSU Tigers. At number 4, it's the Miami Hurricanes. They slide up from number 6 to number 4 for us. They were the only team in the top 6 last week that went out and just took care of business. So therefore, they're going to jump Penn State. They're going to jump Georgia. They have USF this week too, by the way, which could only strengthen what they have on their schedule because USF has gone out and done a really nice job. So you get a win against USF, a ranked team, or might be a ranked team, might be a playoff contender by season's end. You got a win already against Notre Dame, a team that I still have tons of respect for. Miami, I think, is appropriately ranked in the top 4. They are number 4 with the demolition of Bethune-Cookman in week number 2. At number 5, one of the biggest movers of the week, the Oklahoma Sooners. A dominant, resume-defining victory in the only first-ranked matchup of the entire season. What I think is so laughable, like I look at the AP poll. Right now, the AP poll has Oklahoma at number 13. And that is genuinely laughable. They're behind Clemson for crying out loud. Like Clemson, through 6 quarters, looked lifeless. Oklahoma goes out and convincingly beats Michigan. And by the way, it could have been worse if not for a couple of mistakes in the game, a turnover or 2 in the game, giving Michigan new lease on life a few times in the game. That thing could have been worse. There were plays left on the field. So if I'm grading Oklahoma's performance last week, it's probably like a B+, like really good win, great on defense, but there's more in the tank there. Oklahoma comes all the way up from 14, where we had them last week, into the top 5. Very few teams with a better win. Very few teams that can beat you in as many ways as Oklahoma can beat you through the first 2 weeks of the season. They're at Temple this week. That will do nothing to enhance my prediction and evaluation of the Oklahoma Sooners. Penn State is in at number 6. I had them at number 3 last week. Yes, shutout, but their strength of schedule is embarrassing. Like this week, their murderous row of non-conference continues with Villanova. And last week, frankly, the first half of that game wasn't that great to begin with. There's still more in the tank for Penn State, and I think they're kind of playing with their food a bit. But I want to see a 4-quarter performance from Penn State. 4 quarters. And I don't care if it's against Villanova. I don't care if it's against Ohio State. I just want to see 4 quarters put together. And then they can get back. Because I still think on paper, I think they're one of the best teams in the country. I just haven't seen it yet. So kind of got to see it to believe it. So I can believe all I want, but I got to see it. At number 7, it's the Georgia Bulldogs. They were at number 4 last week. I thought it was sluggish. Now, they ended up winning the game. They're at Tennessee this week, so we'll learn all we need to know about the Georgia Bulldogs, but I have questions about their pass protection. I have questions about their passing game. I have questions about their offensive creativity. Those are legitimate questions right now. And all those can be alleviated with a good win on the road at Tennessee this week. So everything is right in front of Georgia, but right now I've dropped them down. in my rankings all the way to number 7 from number 4 a week ago. At number 8, it's the Texas Longhorns. They were number 7 last week. I dropped them back just a little bit sloppy in some areas last week. I thought it was a strong bounce back performance from March Manning. I thought he played much better from week 1 to week 2. I still think the ceiling's really high for this unit. I really like what they have on the defensive side. They'll play UTEP this week. I won't learn anything about them, but I still think Texas is very much a player for the national championship. I have them at number 8. At number 9, the Florida State Seminoles. Very few teams were as dominant as they were last week. A lot of people laughed at me and said, well, you're putting them in the top 10 based on what? Just watch them. Like, watch how they execute, watch the level of efficiency, and look at this past week when they not just showed their ceiling, but we've seen in the past Florida State be in dogfights against less than stellar competition. That was not the case last week. They're 49-0 at halftime. And Florida State is on a mission this year, and I've loved what I've seen so far. That's why they live currently in the top 10. They're at number 9. I know a bye this week, so we'll see where they are in a couple weeks. So no Florida State this week, but they are comfortably in the top 10. Nothing's changed my opinion on that. At number 10, the Illinois Fighting Illini. I had them at number 19 last week. I thought they had one of the better wins of the week last week. I actually like Duke a lot better than most other people. I especially like, though, when teams go on the road and handle their business. And then I love teams that display a killer instinct that allow the other team to make a mistake or two, but they don't let them off the hook for that. Like, Illinois just went out there and said, forget about it. You want to turn it over 5 times? By all means, give us another chance. We're going to pour it on you, and they did. That, to me, displays a level of killer instinct that is hard to find from time to time. Now, they'll have Western Michigan this week, but I think Illinois is a top 10 football team based on what I've seen the first couple weeks of the season. At number 11, it's the Utah Utes. I had them at 10 last week. They do have a win against UCLA, but that win does not look as good today as it did last week. I had them at 10, dropped them down just one spot. Had to make room for a couple teams. I had to make room for Illinois, and I had to make room for the Oklahoma Sooners. So Utah drops down just one spot. Still really like them. They're on the road at Wyoming this week. At number 12, it's the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They were number 10 last week. Didn't play. We'll find out all we need to know this week. That's against Texas A&M. They're at home. Things should be in a really good spot for Notre Dame. I like how things set up for them against the Aggies. I think they get back to running the football. I think they get back to playing good, solid man defense. I'm very excited about that game. I think that's got a real opportunity for Notre Dame to kind of showcase, hey, man, we are exactly who we've always been. We had a tough game week 1, but guess what? We're still a national championship contender. I think they have a chance to show that this week against the Aggies. They sit at number 12. At number 13, the biggest mover of the entire weekend. That is the USF Bulls. They were unranked last week. Probably not a huge surprise. I don't think anybody had them ranked last week, but going on the road and beating the Florida Gators, the way they beat the Florida Gators, they gained the Florida Gators. They forced a couple mistakes against the Florida Gators. They were opportunistic. Yeah, Florida made some mistakes. Yeah, Florida had a couple penalties. Guess what? We're going to take advantage. USF did that. I also think they have a difference maker at quarterback. And if we're going on resumes, how many people have a better resume than USF? They have the number 3 strength of record so far this year. And they're at Miami this week. And what should be a really entertaining game. You know I love Miami. Now we'll really find out about USF. Can they do it again? 3 weeks in a row? If they can, it'd be historically significant. They'll vault all the way in the top 5, potentially, if they can go on the road and get this win against the Hurricanes. At number 14, it's the Tennessee Volunteers. I had them at 13 last week. Part of the reason why I dropped them down just a little bit is the win against Syracuse doesn't look quite as good. But we're going to learn all we need to know about Tennessee. Syracuse, of course, looks human, so maybe that is an indictment on Tennessee. I have no idea. But I really like what I've seen so far from the Volunteers. They'll host the Georgia Bulldogs, and it'll be a great opportunity for them to show just how far they've come, because they have not played well against the Georgia Bulldogs in the past. They have struggled in the Josh Heupel tenure. Can they be better in what should be a very entertaining scene there in Neyland Stadium? At number 15, I have the Ole Miss Rebels. I had them at 22 last week. I actually thought Ole Miss played about as bad as they could in the first quarter. Yet they still won on the road with a -2 turnover margin, and they've actually beaten a team with a pulse. Now, you can say what you want about Kentucky, but Kentucky is a physical bruiser type of team. Ole Miss didn't like that type of team last year. Against bruiser type of teams, they didn't play very well. They showed growth in that department last week and didn't even play well, and yet still got a good victory. They jump up from 22 all the way to 15, but there are some teams that were in front of them that also dropped down. So it's not necessarily an overreaction to the Kentucky win. It's more of an indictment to the teams that slid past where Ole Miss currently resides. They'll host Arkansas this week. At number 16 is the Auburn Tigers. I had them at number 20 last week. Here's the reason why. Their win against Baylor just got better. They spent some time this past week working on the passing game, and when Baylor beat SMU, guess what that did? That strengthened Auburn's resume. They moved from 20 to 16, and some other teams moved behind them. At number 17, a team that was unranked last week, the Vanderbilt Commodores. Answer me this. Who looked better against Virginia Tech? Was it Vandy or South Carolina? Now, here's the beauty. Vandy's at South Carolina this weekend, so we'll find out all we need to know about Vandy and about South Carolina. I look at number 18. That's South Carolina. I had them at number 11 last week. I have now slid them down. Why? Because that Virginia Tech win doesn't look nearly as good. They also, offensively, not a great rhythm. There's still some things to iron out on that side of the ball. I'm be really curious to see how things go for South Carolina this week, because I think Vandy coming to town, that could be a tricky one. It could be a hard game. This is going to be a real indicator of just how far South Carolina's come. If they can go and take care of business at home, they'll be in a great spot. They'll be back ranked in the top 10, 12, 13, 14. But right now, based on like opponents, Vandy looked better against Virginia Tech on the road than South Carolina looked against Virginia Tech in a neutral site. Therefore, Vandy 17, South Carolina 18. At number 19, it's the USC Trojans. I've had them at 17 last week. I know they haven't played anybody, but just watch them. Just watch them. Look at the efficiency that Jaden Mayava is playing with. Look at the firepower they have on the outside. This is a team that is being painfully disrespected in the AP poll. Just watch them. I understand that it hasn't been against a team with the pulse just yet. I get that. But if you watch them, I promise you will be impressed. They'll go on the road to Purdue this week, so maybe we won't learn a whole lot about them. But I do think SC's in a really nice position to be third in the Big Ten, maybe fourth in the Big Ten. We'll see where it all irons out as the season goes along. At number 20, the Alabama Crimson Tide. They were unranked last week. First thing about this, I think Florida State's really, really good. So if we fast forward to the end of the season, I don't think we're going to look at that loss to Florida State as a terrible loss. I also liked last week that Alabama's talent came to the forefront. They didn't mess around. They didn't play with their food. They came out and they played inspired football. Now they hopefully can carry over some of that momentum into a home tilt against Wisconsin, another Power 5 opponent, another opportunity to kind of showcase how much they've grown. This will be a good test for them. So Alabama's right now at 20, but still will be a lot to learn about the Tide this weekend. At 21, it's Iowa State. I had them at 16 last week. The reason why they've dropped now 5 spots is that win against Kansas State doesn't look quite as good. Kansas State loses to Army. They're now 1-2. They didn't look great in their week 2 win either. I honestly don't think Iowa's very good either after watching them. I think Iowa's quarterback situation is problematic. I think their offense lacks a clear identity. They do have Arkansas State this week. Iowa State's still very much in the driver's seat in the Big 12, but I think there's quite a bit to iron out, and I'm not sure the level of competition that they've played against up to this point is as good as some of the teams that sit right in front of them. At 22, it's the Clemson Tigers. This is where they should be ranked, by the way. The AP poll has them at 12. I don't know how. And it's not an indictment on what they could become. It's an indictment on what I've seen so far. It's fine. I loved Clemson in the preseason. I had them number 1 in my preseason poll. I still have a lot of respect for what this team could accomplish. But what I've seen so far is just not good enough. What I've seen so far is a team that's 1-1 that has struggled to be really consistent offensively. What I've seen so far is an offensive line that has had some challenges. So I need to see more from Clemson. So I had them at 12 last week. I've now dropped them all the way to 22. And they're in earn-it mode from this point forward. The good news is they have a great opportunity for them this week to go on the road to a really solid Georgia Tech team and to reestablish dominance in the ACC. At number 23, it's the Missouri Tigers. They were unranked last week by me. They have themselves a quarterback in Bo Prabula. Defense a little bit shaky last week from time to time. They'll face Louisiana this week, but this is a team that should be in the top 25. That was a good win against a Kansas team that I think is pretty good and has a lot of firepower offensively. At number 24, probably a massive overreaction here. I'm sure people will have that same reaction. Mississippi State. How many teams have a win that's better than Mississippi State? I'm just saying. And that if you look at the first half of that game, yes, adjustments were made in the second half. They didn't play as well in the second half. They got out to a decisive lead. It's a team that belongs to the top 25, in my opinion. They go and get a win against a playoff team from a year ago in Arizona State, and we'll find out what Arizona State is as the season goes along. Could very well, if Arizona State loses a couple more games, guess what? Mississippi State will drop out. But right now, that's a really good win against a team that I still have a lot of respect for. And making their quarterback, who I love, and Sam Leavitt, making him as uncomfortable as he was at times in that game has me feeling very optimistic about the progress that Mississippi State's made on defense, and I still think they could score. They've always been able to score. As long as Jeff Levy's calling plays, they'll be able to score. And at number 25, last but certainly not least, it's the TCU Horned Frogs. This is a team that I had 24th last week. I don't know if they're better than A&M, Indiana, Texas Tech, but at least they've played a Power 4 opponent and made mincemeat of North Carolina in the process. So you get credit, by the way, in my world, for actually challenging yourself and going on the road and winning against P4 competition. Teams that dropped out from last week, the 15th ranked Michigan Wolverines. They wouldn't be out by much, though. If I had kind of a next man up, they'd be right there. I think there's plenty still in the tank for Michigan, but I think they can improve in a lot of areas before I could put them back in the top 25. I also dropped Arizona State out of the top 25. They were 18th last week. I had Florida at 20. I've dropped them out of the top 25. I had Texas A&M at 23. I've dropped them out of the top 25. And I had Texas Tech. I dropped them out of the top 25. I haven't played anybody. I'm going to reward teams in my top 25 that have challenged themselves in the non-conference up to this point. I also have Indiana unranked. They haven't played anybody. Yeah, they look better in week 2. They haven't played anybody. So until I see them against real live competition, Power 4 competition, it's hard for me to rank them in the top 25.